We are now getting breaking news on this story. According to two sources, the Saudis are preparing a report that will acknowledge Jamal Khashoggi's death was the result of an interrogation that went wrong. Let's go straight to our senior international correspondent, Arwa Damon, who's there in Istanbul. Arwa, tell me exactly what the Saudis are preparing to admit.
Well, very scant details at this stage, Brooke, and one of those two sources is cautioning that this report is still being prepared, that things could end up changing. According to the other source, this report is most likely going to conclude that the operation was carried out without clearance and transparency, and that those involved will be held responsible. Of course, the backdrop of all of this is coming just as Turkish investigators, the forensics team, was allowed inside the Saudi consulate. They are still indoors. Their vans are still parked outside. Those involved, who are they? Well, throughout our reporting of all of this, the Turks have always been saying that there are 15 Saudi nationals who are persons of interest who arrived in country the same day that Jamal Khashoggi did go missing. If the Saudis do, in fact, come out with this statement, this could be their way of distancing themselves from what happened. And then, of course, what we don't know is what sort of burden of responsibility, whether or not individuals within the consulate itself will also be among those that Saudi Arabia decides to end up holding responsible. There had been, prior to the announcement of this, some speculation, and we heard President Trump speculating about this as well, that perhaps there would be this narrative of rogue elements who did carry out this killing without the authority necessarily of the uppermost echelons of the Saudi government. But this has been a story that has had so many different twists and turns. One really needs to actually wait and see what it is, what kind of statement it is that the Saudis do end up coming out with, Brooke.
But if they are prepared to say what we're reporting, that they'll acknowledge his death was the result of this interrogation gone wrong, then how does that square with the denials that our president has gotten from the king and also from MBS?
Well, I think it is going to raise a lot of questions. It's going to raise the question of, well, if this is going to be your conclusion, why are you coming out with this 13 days later? Surely there must have been some sort of intelligence gathering information that came your way throughout the entire process. Because if you'll remember, the Saudis, up until this very point, when we got this information, when CNN got this information from these two sources, had been saying that Jamal Khashoggi left the consulate the day that he arrived. That doesn't necessarily square with this, but it most certainly would not be the first time over the course of the last 13 days that information was contradictory, did not necessarily make full sense. It would seem from this statement, from the little bit of information we have from these two sources, that this allows the Saudi king, it allows MBS to say, we had nothing to do with this. And that is pretty much what King Salman did tell President Trump, that he had no information, that MBS had no information as to what was going on. It seems, according to these two sources, that it was an interrogation gone wrong, or perhaps they were intending to try to smuggle him out of the country. But again, we're going to have to wait and see. I mean, This has been a story, a tragedy that has been fraught with all sorts of, as I was saying, different competing narratives at times and all sorts of twists and turns.
But to your point, Arwa, that this is 13 days after he walked in and no one ever saw him walked out. And you have been standing there in Istanbul reporting on these forensic teams, these Turks who have been inside the Saudi consulate. And I'm wondering, do you know if that has anything to do with the timing of this potential Saudi statement?
It most certainly would appear on the surface as if it does. One also has to look back at what happened over the last 24 hours. You know, Sunday morning, there was some pretty harsh rhetoric that came out from the Saudi government that was in response to President Trump saying that if it did turn out that the Saudi government was involved, there would be severe repercussions. The Saudis then came out and said that they would respond even more to a greater level. You then had that op-ed by the general manager of Al Arabiya that they then distanced themselves from, but that basically threatened the U.S. economy, threatened to jack up oil prices. You had all sorts of statements then coming out from D.C. trying to sort of do damage control, it would have seemed, late yesterday, saying that, they have nothing to do with these statements made by the Al Arabiya's general manager. And then today we had this flurry of activity where finally the investigators, the Turkish forensic team, was allowed on the ground into the consulate. We don't know exactly if they're going to have access to all of the rooms they want to have access to. And now, of course, this information coming out from these two sources.
This is huge, huge news. Arwa Damon, thank you so much.